Folks, for class today, you're going to be reading some poems that are full of wonder. I think they are. I think they're full of a kind of rich mystery. They introduce some unanswered questions that I think are. I think they fairly approximate a lot of what we expect poetry to do, insofar as introducing us to the unsaid, the unsayable. Right, that which is mysterious and wonderful. These we might also call ambiguous poems, or at least poems with a slightly ambiguous ending. Okay, so today I want to talk about the difference between ambiguity, which I deem to be great, a fantastic element of poetry, and confusion, which the negative sign indicates is bad. Okay. So ambiguity versus confusion. Now, this is a kind of this is a subtle point, right? This far in the class, we've covered more sort of foundational elements: the image, the line, sound, diction, etc. This is a finer point. Okay, this is a kind of another level in the video game of poetry, we might say. You might have talked about this a little bit in fiction. Okay, this is something that fiction writers like to talk about a lot, and that's because it really is intrinsic to the way we tell stories in language, the way we just use language generally. Okay, so you may already have some familiarity with it, but in poetry, it's a little different. So I want to talk about its application to poems today. Okay, so let's start with confusion here. Okay, confusion, I would like to suggest, emanates from a lack of imagination. Okay, confusion is when you finish a poem, right? And rather than mystery, rather than awe and wonder, you feel that something is missing, right? That a piece of the poem has gone missing. You're somehow left outside the meaning of the poem or the experience of the poem in some way. Okay, there's something missing, some essential piece of information, or some essential emotion or experience. Okay, this is confusion. Now, Robert Frost says that poems should be momentary stays against confusion. That is, they should be places where all confusion stops, right? Moments of crystal clarity. James Wright calls this the pure, clear word, right? So what they're getting at here is that clarity and specificity are the poet's best weapons against confusion. Okay? The more specific you are, the more detailed you are in representing experience, in your presentation of images and emotions, the less confusion you're going to encounter, or the less confusion your readers are going to encounter. Okay? This does not mean, however, that we want to abandon all ambiguity, and then we're going to talk a little bit about that. But momentary stays against confusion. We want clarity. Okay, now this is very difficult to discuss, I'm aware, and it's also sort of difficult to discuss in terms of just providing a line as an example, because a confusing line in one poem may actually be in another poem fairly richly ambiguous, right? And a positive attribute to the poem. So it's the best way to talk about it is to provide a whole poem. Okay. So what I want to do, I want to read Charles Simick's poem, "The Tower." Okay. You've already read some Simick. It should be a little familiar to you. This is a different poem. I'm going to post the link to the space below the video on YouTube so that you can open it up and read it along with me, and sort of take in the poem, and then we can talk about how this poem is actually, I think, richly ambiguous. However, on first read, someone might consider it slightly confusing. Okay? The Tower. 5, 6 chairs piled up in the yard, and you on top of them, sitting like a hanging judge, wearing only pajama bottoms. The sparrows, what must they think? If people are watching, they are as quiet as goldfish or expensive cuts of meat. Hour after hour, alone with the sky in its mad serenity on the rickety, already teetering, already leaning tower. How frightened the neighbors must be. Not even a child walks the streets in this heat. Not even a car passes and slows down. What do you see in the distance, O Father? A window pane struck by the setting sun? A game called on account of darkness? The players like fleas in a convent? Hell's bells about to toll? Okay. That's an interesting poem, I think. It's a strange poem, certainly. It's a weird poem. But I would like to submit to you that it is not confusing. I will say it's not at all confusing, okay? So what's going on here? We have the speaker looking at, we learn the father, right? Sitting in his pajama bottoms, only his pajama bottoms, on top of 5 or 6 chairs piled up in the yard, right? And then the speaker thinks about, oh, what must the sparrows think? And people, if people are watching, then they're really quiet. And he's thinking about his father hour after hour alone with the sky and its mad serenity on the rickety, already teetering, already leaning tower. So he's thinking about his father up here. Thinking about the neighbors, how frightened they would be. It's very quiet. Not even a child walks down the street, not even a car passes, okay. And then asks his father in the second to last stanza, what do you see in the distance? And then we have a litany of things that the speaker is asking, hey, father, do you see this? Is this what you see in the distance? A window pane struck by the setting sun, a game called on account of darkness, the players like fleas in a convent. Fantastic, simile there. Hell's bells about to toll, and then we had that last line, right? Now that last line in particular introduces a whole other level, I think, of rich ambiguity, right? And that's just because of how different it is from the last 3 images we're given, right? Hell's bells about to toll, something really ominous, really, compared with, a baseball game that was called because it was getting dark, or a window pane struck by the setting sun, right? So this is an ambiguous poem, right? But it is not confusing. And why is it not confusing? It's not confusing because we know exactly what's going on. We know that there's a speaker looking at his father or thinking about his father, sitting up in his pajama bottoms on top of a rickety pile of chairs, and then talking to his father. Right? That's what's happening. It's very clear. It's very clear. It's a pretty straightforward poem, right? What makes it ambiguous is we're not exactly sure what this means necessarily, right? And that is actually a good thing, our inability to express exactly what it means. But I think we feel it, right? Is the poem, someone could provide a reading of the poem where they say, well, maybe this is about the speaker's relationship to his father, right? Maybe this is about death, perhaps, hell's bells about to toll, a game called on account of darkness, right? These are kind of death-oriented images, so maybe it's about the father's death, right? Maybe it's just about the speaker and sort of how he dreams or something like that. Maybe it's a dream of the speaker, and it's sort of the speaker's own psyche kind of processing these things. And maybe we shouldn't think so much about the father, but just think about the weirdness of someone sitting up on chairs like this. Okay, what do the chairs mean, etc. So there's a bunch of different endings that can emanate from this poem, but they can only do so because the poem is so detailed, is so concrete, is so not confusing. Okay, again, we're coming back to sort of this, the abstract concrete thing, right? The more specific, the more non-confusing you are, right? The more concrete you are, even in the weirdest images, the more rich ambiguity, the more rich abstraction you're going to be able to call forth. Okay? So that is basically ambiguity, a strangeness, a newness, a weirdness, very detailed described, right? Described in detail, is what I mean to say, from which many different meanings may arise. A poem with many different meanings. A poem should end with questions, right? Not necessarily grammatical questions, right, with question marks, but should provide some kind of opening, right? The poem should give us enough information so that now we can sort of do the wondering on our own, right? Another sort of parallel with this ambiguity versus confusion thing is in movies, right? Hollywood movies, where I'm sure you've all had the experience of sitting in a movie theater or watching a movie where the ending just sucks. You know, it's like you're with the poem, or you're with the poem, you're with the movie the whole way, and then at the end something stupid happens. Either like there's some stupid surprise, or the character does something that is that you think is ridiculous, or the movie just ends without providing any explanation of what's going on, and there are some key pieces of information missing. You're like, well, what happened to that person? What happened to this person? How did they come together? The ending doesn't work, right? That's a confusing ending because there's information left out. It's not detailed enough to offer us the meanings that we want, right? But there are also endings to films that leave us with questions that are richly ambiguous and good, right? So, a movie that ends with a kind of, a sort of open-ended thing. We see the character moving on somewhere, or going somewhere else, or something happens in the last scene that causes us to think, well, I wonder if this is actually the way things went down, right? So the movie offers us questions, but we still feel that that's satisfying in a way, right? We still feel like we've been offered the full account of facts, right? That's an ambiguous ending, right? In a good way, right? So how do we do this at the end of our poems? That's the question, right? How do we make this happen? This kind of rich ambiguity. The only real hard and fast way I've been able to find is to trust your images. Okay, trust your concrete images and let those images do the speaking for you. Let them do the hard lifting. All right, and you want to resist the impulse to explain things, right? You want to resist the impulse to put on the explaining hat and talk about, well, I have my father up here on chairs because this symbolizes our relationship, right? Now, the reader will be able to figure that out, right? Or at least feel that. So you don't need to tell us that. Just give us the father on the chairs, right? And this is, I've made a lot of comments on your poems to this effect, hey, you don't need to explain this, let the image do the work for you, let it just stand there, right? A good parallel is in visual art, right? A painting, someone paints a painting of a landscape scene with nice trees and a setting sun and, a little kid skipping stones on the water, right? And we don't ask necessarily what that means, right? It's just it's a beautiful scene, right? And that's what we want to provide in our poems. Just give us the images, give us the scenes, and then let the reader enjoy kind of working out the rich meanings there. All right? So let your father sit on a pile of chairs and resist the impulse to explain. Okay, a poem should be an eloquently posed question that the reader couldn't answer if they wanted to, but that they feel at the end of the poem that they've been introduced to some sort of wonder. Okay. And what you want to do is just find a poem that does this for you, right? Maybe it'll be one of the poems you read today. Maybe it's something you've read before in class or just previously, or maybe you've yet to find it, but you will. A poem that leaves you with this sense of wonder, this sense of mystery, and then try and emulate that. Try and do what they do, right? T.S. Eliot says that the best good poets borrow, great poets steal, right? So you want to look to your predecessors and find what has worked for them, what works for you, and emulate that as best you can. Okay? So you have poems to read and an assignment to do for today. Okay, guys. Thank you.